Welcome to my channel and C Programming for Absolute Beginners. In this video tutorial, we will see how we can set up Visual Studio Code for building, executing, and debugging C language programs. In this video, we will open the Visual Studio Code, set up the workspace and task, and we will see how we can build, execute, and debug the C programs from a source file. Therefore, before going forward, you need to download and install C, C++ toolset, Visual Studio Code, and C, C++ extensions and set up the environment. I have made separate videos for these steps and links of these videos is in the description box. You guys can check that out if you have not yet completed these steps. So let's start by verifying that C, C++ toolset is properly installed on your computer. For that, open the command line prompt. Let's type gcc space minus minus version. Hit enter and it says gcc built by MSYS2 is installed with version 10.3.0, which means gcc is successfully installed on this computer. If you see any error messages stating that GCC is not recognized as an internal or external command, that it means that GCC is not installed on your computer, or if it is installed, then the path environment variable is not set properly. And you need to follow the video tutorials for installing C, C++ toolset that we discussed earlier. Similarly, you can also verify if the debugger is installed or not. For that, type gdb space minus minus version, hit enter, and you will see the gdb is installed. Gdb is the debugger that we will use for debugging the C language programs with Visual Studio Code. After the verification of successful installation of C, C++ toolset, now we will set up the build task in Visual Studio Code for building the source files. Double click on Visual Studio Code to launch it. So this is the interface of Visual Studio Code Integrated Development Environment. On the left hand side, you can see different icons like Explorer, Search, Source Control, Run and Debug, and Extension. Click on Extensions and make sure that C, C++ extension is installed. If it is not installed, you have to go through the tutorials that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Now we will set up the Visual Studio Code workspace for writing a C language program. For that, go to the File menu and click on Add Folder to Workspace. Let's create a folder on the desktop, name C program. Hit Add. Yes. After adding the folder, let's save the workspace as, let me call it C program. Hit save. So you can see the created workspace by clicking on the Explorer button, and there is the C program workspace and C program folder. In order to create a file, select this folder and click on New File. We are creating this file for writing the C language program. Let me call this file test code.c. .c is required in order to create a source file that will contain the C language code. Hit enter test code file is created and open in the IDE. Let me write some example code for this video. So this is a simple C language program that takes an integer from the user and displays on screen if it is even or odd. Now in the next step, we will generate an executable file from this source code and run it. So we need to set up the build task that will generate executable file from the source code. We need to do this activity just for one time. So for that, click on terminal and then on configure default build task. So it shows the list of the available build tasks that you can choose to build your source file. Currently only one task is available, namely C++, gcc.exe build active file C program. It also shows the default path of the compiler. So click on it. So it opens a file named task.json. So this is the task file that contains code in JSON. You can also notice in the C program folder, there is another folder shown up named .vs code, and this task.json file is placed in this folder. So this is the code for the default build task that comes up with the compiler. If this code doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. I will explain a little bit of it. So you can see this starting and closing bracket for the task. And the type of this task is CP build, which is C++ build. And in the label, you can see C++ gcc.exe build active file. So this is the label which is displayed when you select the configure default build task, and the list of the tasks that can be used to build the file are shown. So the C++ gcc.exe build active file C program. This is the label that we are given for this task. So next is the command. This is the command that this task is using, which is the gcc.exe, and these are the list of arguments. As you can notice, each argument is separated by commas. So for this command, you can see there are 5 arguments. These command arguments specify which kind of information this command will return. For example, this -g specifies that this command will return the default debug information. If we want to extract maximum possible debug information, for that we can change it to G3. Similarly, you can also add some other arguments. For example, if you also want to display the warnings on the screen, for that you can write another arguments, namely -var. So you need to type a comma as well in order to separate the arguments. Also, this arguments shows that a .exe file will be generated in the current directory with the file name same as the source file. Let's save the file in order to save the changes made in the file. In order to load the configurations properly, we have to restart the Visual Studio Code. Now let's run the build task. For that, go to the terminal and select run build task. So you can see a file with name same as the source file is created with .exe extension. This is the executable file that you need to run in order to run the program. So in order to run this executable file, you need to open a new terminal. For that, you can see this drop down icon with this new terminal and select the command prompt. So in the command prompt, you can type the executable file name, which is test space code, hit enter, and it says test is not recognized as internal or external command. The reason for this error is that it is taking these two words as two different commands because there is a space between test and code. So what we can do, we can specify the file name in double quotes. For example, you can write a double quote and inside it test space code. This way it will take it as a single command and execute it. Hit enter, and now it asks the user to enter the integer. Let me enter 7, which is an odd number. Hit enter and it shows you entered an odd number. So in this way you can build an executable file from the source file using the task and run that executable file by using a terminal. If we don't want to build the executable file first and then going to the terminal and type the file name to run it, we can simply build task such a way that it builds the executable file from the source file and run it directly without the need for going to the terminal and type the file name. So let's see how we can do that. So first close the terminal and the build task and go to the terminal and select configure default build task. Yes, select it. So this is the default task that we are using. Instead of updating this task, what I am going to do, I will copy and create a new task. Copy, put a comma after this curly bracket and paste the copied task. Let me change this task type to shell and change the label to build and run the active file. Since we want to execute two commands, therefore instead of giving the arguments in this fashion, we will provide these arguments exactly after the this command. So before that, let me close this Explorer window. Okay, so we can copy these arguments one by one and just paste it at the end of the command without any comma and by just adding one space. Similarly, copy this minus G3, add a space and paste it, and minus wall, space, and this is the file name, space, paste it, minus O, space, and copy paste this .exe file name as well. Since we have copy pasted all these arguments, so there is no need for these arguments. So this command will build the source code and generate an executable file. But we also need to run that generated executable file. For that, let me copy uh, this file name and place it at the end of the command. So now this command will generate the executable file and also run it in the shell, the type that is specified earlier. We will also delete this group as it is not required. After that, let's save the file and close it. And now we will restart the Visual Studio Code in order to load the settings effectively. So double click the Visual Studio Code to launch it. So now what we will do, we will build the task and generate an executable file from the source code and also run it by using the task that we generated. For that, go to the terminal and select run task. So you can see there are two tasks available that can be used. This is the default task that was generated by the extension, and this build and run the active file task is the task that we recently uh, generated. So click on it, and you can see there is the error in the task. The reason of this error is that Windows PowerShell is the default terminal for the Visual Studio Code. You can check it by clicking on this drop down menu, and you can see the PowerShell is the default terminal for the Visual Studio Code. But we need to run the executable file in the command prompt. We can change this default terminal by clicking on the select default profile. So you can see there are two options. The PowerShell is the current default profile. So click on the command prompt, and now you can observe that command prompt is the default terminal. Let's delete this terminal and again go to the terminal and run task. Yes, we want to build the task using this customized build task. Again, we got some errors as expected. This time it says it does not recognize the directory. The reason for this error is that there is a space in the file name and in the directory. Therefore, we need to handle these spaces in the file and directory names. For that, go to the terminal and open the configure default build task. And yes, we want to change in the build and run. Therefore, we will open that task. Since these are the arguments that contain the file and directory name, therefore we need to specify them in the double quote. As you can see, the command is already in the double quote. Therefore, we will need escape sequence in order to give the double quotes. For that, type backslash double quote. Also, at the end of the file, backslash double quote. Similarly, we can provide a double quote to the executable file name as well. So once you have provided the double quotes to the file, save it and close it. And now you have to restart the Visual Studio Code in order to launch the configurations properly. Close the terminal, and uh, now let's run the task. Yes, build and run active file. And you can see the task has been successfully built, and executable file is generated, and that executable file is being run. So it is asking, please enter an integer. Let me enter 20, which is an even number. Hit enter, and it displays you enter an even number. So you have seen that by using this method, we can build the task that generate an executable file from the source code, and we can run that generated source code. And for that, we don't need to use any kind of extensions like code runner in order to run the task. And every time you want to run some C language code, you just need to go to the terminal and run the task. Select the task you want to run, and you can see your code will run in the terminal. So now we will see how we can debug the code. Now we will see how we can debug the program. For that, in the left side, you can see the icon run and debug. Click on it and run and debug. So there are two options for the debugger. One is the GDB and the second one is the Windows. If you remember, GDB is the debugger that we installed, and we will be using same debugger for debugging the program. So click on it. Yes, we will be using the default build task that was provided by the C++ extension. So it has shown the debug console where it is showing the debug information, and in the terminal tab you can simply see the program is asking the user to enter the integer. Let me enter 5. It shows you enter an odd number. Also, you can observe in the Explorer window that a new file, launch.json, is being created in the .vs code, and this file is also open. You can also change or update the content of this file. In this video, we are not going to change anything in this file. Coming back to the run and debug. So in order to debug your code, you just have to click on this start debugging. As you start debugging, you can see a new toolbar appears at the top. You can stop the debugging session anytime by clicking on this stop debug session. So in order to debug the program, let's put a breakpoint at line number 5 and now start the debug session. So you can see the program is being stopped at the line 5 where I have put the breakpoint, and this toolbar shows that we can have the following set of operations during the debugs. And this toolbar shows the different options that is available in the debug session, like continue, step over, step into, step out, and restart, and of course the stop debug session. So let's discuss briefly one by one these icons. First option, continue, is used to control the flow of program from one breakpoint to the another breakpoint. The second option is the step over. This option is used to control the program flow by line. For example, if I click on this option, you can see only one line of code will be executed. Currently, we are at line number 5 of the code. If I click on it, the program will move to the line 7. And similarly, if I further click on it, you will see a print enter an integer will be displayed in the terminal, because it will just execute the line number 7 and wait on line number 8. Similarly, you can control the flow of the program line by line. The next option is the step into and step out. The step into option is used to step into the function. For example, the printf, both printf and scanf are the function, uh, but when we use the step over, it's executed this complete line. Whereas the printf is a function that is defined in stdio.h, but we executed the complete function as a result of the step over command. But if I use the step into command, it will take the program into the scanf function. Let me do it on the scanf function. Just click on step into, and you will see the debugger has taken us to the stdio.h file inside the scanf function. Similarly, you can also move step by step inside the scanf function. Let me enter the input, and you can also use the step out command in order to step out of the current function. So we are returned in the main C program, and let me continue the program. It will run the program until the next breakpoint or end of the program. So program is completed, and it is showing the message you entered an odd number. So in this way you can put multiple breakpoints in a program and can see how your program behaves under different circumstances. So this was a brief introduction to the debug options available in the Visual Studio Code. We will see the debugging in detail in some other lab sessions. So let's sum up the video. In this video, we have seen how we can verify that C++ toolset has been installed and configured properly. We also use the Visual Studio Code, set up the workspace and task, and we see how we can build the executable files from the source code and how we can update the task that builds the source code to executable file and run it. And at last, we see how we can use run and debug of the Visual Studio Code in order to debug the code, and what kind of options we have for debugging the source code in the Visual Studio Code. Hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you for your time. See you next time. Bye.